Okay, I've been sent some questions and I'd like to answer these questions I've been sent by email. So the first question is, how do addictive substances mask or numb the lower emotions? How does this work? Well, I used to be in food addiction, and Dr. Hawkins has done quite a lot of extensive research in this. But you know, what does it mean? How do addictive substances could be food, they could be ice creams, chocolates, donuts, or they can be other substances, marijuana, cocaine, ecstasy, also alcohol. There's also love addiction, so not a substance as such, but also can have a similar effect to alcohol, drugs, or foods. Now, how does this work? Well, you see, when I was, I used to be in active food addiction. I used to love binging out on food, sweet foods, and other foods. And how it worked was that because I was in addiction, it meant that I had a very inflated ego. What this meant? It meant I was full of fear, full of self-loathing, full of anger and resentment. But I had all of these feeling unworthiness, and I had all these feelings underneath when I was in active addiction. And and I was a control freak as well. So this led to my ego being constantly in hyperthinking mode. Thoughts were just continuously going through at 100 miles an hour, and there was feelings, very, very negative feelings, but they were alleviated through addiction. For example, through binging out on donuts, for example. So, because the ego is so inflated, what this means in people who have inflated egos, not everyone has an inflated ego. A saint hardly has an ego, an enlightened teacher has no ego. Normal people have a moderate ego. Addicts tend to have very inflated egos. But especially people with very inflated egos tend to be addictive in their nature, which means that they easily become addicted to anything that will give them temporary relief from their deep fear, anxiety, self-loathing, or feelings of unworthiness, to just comfort them. Or they'll just take, if they have bad news or difficult symptoms to deal with, they will use something. Could be food, could be alcohol, could be drugs, whatever it is. Could be love addiction. So, how does this work? How can you understand this, what's happening spiritually? Well, if you've got an inflated ego, i.e. you haven't done that much spiritual work, you become very addictive. So what happens is the suppressed feelings create the level of suppressed feelings. If you're an addict, it means you've been suppressing your feelings regularly. It means every time life is difficult, you could be using donuts or drugs or alcohol to just get some temporary relief and feel happy for a short while. And how this works is because the ego is so inflated, i.e. the thoughts are vibrating very rapidly, and also there's a lot of suppressed feelings. The suppressed feelings create a kind of you could look at it like a mask, a big mask. So these rapid thoughts and this mask of suppressed feelings which haven't been felt out, they create like a block to the sunlight of the spirit, to conscious contact with God, to the eternal now, to the infinite peace. So they create a block to that. And so someone with inflated ego hardly ever feels that spiritual connection because the thoughts are so rapid, and there's so many suppressed feelings which have never been felt out because one has been in active addiction. Addictions can be more subtle as well, watching TV all the time, Netflix, checking Facebook. So there are other addictions as well. But these suppressed feelings and the thoughts are just blocking that the presence of divinity, the presence of that the sunlight of the spirit, and most people have had glimpses of that at least, even if they're not into dedicated spiritual work, where they've just felt in that timeless now, where everything is just revealed to be beautiful and stunning in God's creation. So, if you recall those moments, that's when, the ego and that the suppressed feelings are not in the way of experiencing that divine joy in the present moment. But okay, so with an addict who's got inflated ego, they are just they are usually in a low state, a negative mood, unless they're using, or if they get bad news, they need to use, it can be food or alcohol, just to get some temporary relief from the negative feelings. How it works is then, when you drink, for example, alcohol, or you have the donuts, they temporarily deflate the ego, i.e. the thoughts quieten down and the suppressed feelings seem to clear away for a short period of time, and you get access to that spiritual experience. Now, different people and different external variables, whether it be donuts, drugs, alcohol, cocaine, whatever it may be, depending on the what type of person, how inflated their ego is, and their projection of specialness onto the item, and also their collective belief systems that are programmed with in relationship to that item. For example, let's take alcohol. As soon as they drink the alcohol, then the thoughts sort of quieten down enormously. The suppressed feelings seem to clear away for a short while, and you get that spirit. You start to feel that joy, that feeling of connection, that feeling of oneness, that feeling like you fit into the world, that feeling like all is well. So when you use an addictive substance, it gives you that relief from the drudgery of just being in your thinking and being in, and those suppressed feelings dropping in the timeless now. So then what happens is you get that relief, that spiritual experience, because you've taken the alcohol, but because it's not an authentic way to really connect to the spiritual essence, you see the thoughts and the suppressed feelings come back again, and then one has lost that that short-term relief from the negative feelings. So often, if you're in an addictive cycle, you'll just want that alcohol again as soon as it starts to feel bad enough, or if you get some bad news or have a difficult day, you'll be back to the alcohol because you're now addicted to getting that temporary relief. Of course, the way out of that cycle is to do spiritual work. That way, you can actually increase your level of consciousness, and it won't drop, because you're actually releasing your ego. If you were to feel out your suppressed feelings and just let go, cancel all your negative beliefs, or make all your thoughts meaningless through whatever spiritual mechanism you do. You could do it through the Course in Miracles or self-inquiry, as Muji does. Then, as those thoughts are released and as those suppressed feelings are felt out, you'll naturally get to higher and higher levels of peace and happiness. And you won't need to take food, alcohol, or drugs to get that temporary relief whenever you're feeling bad. So, I encourage you to do spiritual work, release your over-identification with thoughts, the meaningfulness of thoughts. Sit down with your feelings whenever you have difficult feelings and try and feel them out. Try not to avoid them with TV, food, donuts, alcohol, whatever it may be. And then they'll release. Also, I think another part of the question was about how long does it take, and stacks of feelings. Well, anyone who's been suppressing their feelings, and most people have to some to limited extent or not, unless you're an enlightened teacher and you've transcended your ego. But if you see yourself. Most people have like a reservoir, for example. Maybe there's an individual. Let's take myself when I was in active food addiction. I may have had, say, 100 units of suppressed fear that I haven't felt out, 100 units of suppressed guilt, 100 units of suppressed anger, 100 units of suppressed shame. So I may have these, like, almost you could picture them as cylinders of suppressed feelings. Now, if you continue to do spiritual work and you don't use, and you feel these feelings out and you let go the thoughts surrounding them, then you will get to higher and higher levels of peace, as I have in my own experience and in my own story. So that eventually you never experience the huge depths of fear or anger or despair or unworthiness. It becomes lighter and lighter, and your fluctuations around a higher average, if you like, increases. And then as you get to the higher levels, you tend to have days of peace and serenity and stillness and joy much more often, with only temporary blips, temporary smaller blips of anger or fear or whatever it may be, or ego. So that's the answer to that question. I think there was another segment to the question. Oh yes. Is the spiritual experience coming from addictive substances truly spiritual? Well, yes, but different substances tend to suppress the ego more or less. So generally, if you have a cross-section of people and they're having a bad day, if they have a donut, the donut might suppress the ego like 50%, so they'll feel relatively good. If you were to take, for example, cocaine, it might just suppress the ego 75% or 100%, and then you'll go into a very high state, feeling really, really good for a short period of time until the drugs, it seems like the drug effect wears off and the ego reinflates, and then you're back to feeling bad again. So yes, they do mimic it, but the best way to have authentic spiritual experiences which are long-lasting and don't end is to do spiritual work, not to try and get temporary relief through TV, donuts, drugs, alcohol, or even love addiction. The next part of the question was confusion around wishing to see people in their true identity as emanations of God, whilst not being blinded to the less positive aspects. Well, that's an interesting question. Confusion around wishing to see people in their true identity. Well, you've got to do spiritual work, and I would also just pray for wisdom and intuition in how you deal with them. As you do spiritual work, you're trying to bless people, you're trying to see the divinity within them, you're trying to see their innate sinlessness, their stillness, and you start to see the others as being very beautiful and lovable. That does tend to happen as you do spiritual work. You see everyone is lovable and trustable. Now, of course, not everyone is trustable, even though as you start to remove the filters and judgments from your ego, then it can seem that everyone is. Now, that's a level of spiritual development whereby one is kind of spiritually naive, and one hasn't yet connected to the divine wisdom and intuition of grace. So often if you go to groups or have a teacher to support you or a coach, they'll often tell you to love everyone, but stay away from those who may be non-integrous, or you get some hint that they may not be they may have dishonest behavior. So you can love them from afar, but it's best not to leave your wallet in the room and go out with those type of people, because even though they look lovable and trustable, they may just take your wallet when you're not looking. So that's the thing with that. But eventually, as you keep doing your spiritual work, and usually you go to groups and you have teachers who tell you not to be when you start seeing everyone as so lovable, and you're starting to cry and see the divinity in everyone, Sometimes you've not yet got the discernment and the wisdom, and so usually teachers and groups will tell you to be cautious around certain types of people or situations. So that's a great question. Okay, so I'll end that here for now.